Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning. Let us now complete our discussion of Bal Sarkar's plays with a last play called Stale News. And this is along with Procession and the second play that we discussed. All these three plays, Procession, as well as Boma and Stale News, all belong to the third phase of Badal Sarkar's career as a playwright. They were all performed in open courtyards or open air performances that where the audiences could actually intimately interact with the actors on stage. Not on stage, but in front of them. Stale News, unlike the previous two plays that we discussed, are more historically situated. They are more located in the historical context of the British suppression and persecution of the Santhali tribes that belong to West Bengal. And the play really is about focuses on the state persecution and the police violence and the brutal tyranny of police violence, as well as state persecution in the lives of the Santhalis. In some sense, this play lays bare the machinations of the colonial state and the police, as well as the wealthy landowners and a certain class of the landowners was created by the British in the wake of the permanent settlement of the Bengal presidency. And the play really is a description, a detailed description, a detailed dramatization of the plight of the Santalis, who for the longest time had enjoyed absolute insularity, absolute isolation in the thick forests of Bengal, until their life was interrupted by the British colonial force, along with the police, and the creation of a new landholding class that was in some sense responsible for reducing the lives of the Santhalis to poor slaves and debt-ridden bonded laborers. So the play describes the spiraling cycle of violence and persecution and poverty and impoverishment of these Santhalis, and the way in which Santhalis towards the end of the play decide to revolt against the brutal tyranny of British colonialism, as well as the landowners for whom they worked. And so none of them actually end up surrendering to the colonial force, but get killed in the process. But there's a deep sense of injustice, indignation, and rebellion, and the play actually ends on that note of rebellion, and which also generates a sense of hope. So let us just look at some of the few sections in the play that are descriptive now of these different scenes. And so again, like the previous two plays we discussed by Bal Sarkar, again you have a chorus of 8 actors who are all anonymous, and they again use their own bodies and the formations of their bodies to actually give the audience a sense of the historical setting of the play. Again, like the earlier plays by Bal Sarkar, this play also employs certain important oral formulae which give the audience a sense of rhythm of repetition, of memory, right, of a certain historical memory of persecution and violence. One constant refrain throughout the play is this phrase called Damin Eco, right? And Damin Eco, we later realize, is that part of Bhagalpur in Bihar where the Santalis were made to settle down. So the play in some sense describes the historical trajectory of this community of Santalis that for the longest time was, at least the play suggests that they were the first agriculturists, the first settlers to settle down and practice agriculture and live in relative isolation until their lives were interrupted by the British colonial regime and the incursions of colonial modernity. So this play describes that, and we discover later on that under British rule, in fact, one of the actors says, and this is a fairly long description of what happened. He says that when the state of Bihar came under British rule, the barter-based economy and social life of the Santals began to crumble under the impact of the exploitation and oppression of the British merchants and the money-based economy they introduced. The Santals began to emerge into the open after the almost complete insularity they had enjoyed in their social life for thousands of years. They started to spread over areas like Pakur, Dumka, Bhagalpur and Purnia in Bihar, and Birbhum, Bankura and Murshidabad in Bengal around the year 1970. Landholders of these areas brought them in, employed them in clearing the forests. That part of Bhagalpur in which Santals had concentrated, forming a majority of the population, was known as Daminiko, later described as the Santhal Parganas, the inaccessible forests of the region. And so this was cleared. The inaccessible forests of this region were cleared by the Santals. They built homes in the forest, and through hours of toil, they raised a golden harvest on a land that had never been trod upon by human feet. So the description really is about the incursions, the presence, growing presence of the British, and also in the post-colonial era, you also see how landholders of these areas of Bihar brought the Santalis in together from across various regions where they were made to work for them as hired laborers on the land. And the Santalis managed to were responsible for becoming expert tillers, laborers who worked on the land and who managed to raise excellent harvests for the landowners. But the entire play is also set against the context, the backdrop, the historical backdrop of colonialism and the struggle for freedom. And there are many voices in the play that represent the voices of the nationalist elite, many of whom were at the forefront of the freedom struggle. Many of whom also wrote against British, but they were also in some sense legitimizing British rule because they felt that perhaps that India was not yet ready for freedom, or India needed the presence of the British in their lives because the British had given them a lot in terms of English education, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of technology, and so which is why they were beholden to the British for introducing India to modernity and modern life. And so there are, for example, a listing of names, right? A listing of several names that are now famous in the earlier generations of pre-independence Bengal. So you have, for example, Sri Chaitanya, Ramakrishna, Sai Baba, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Ram Mohan, Vidyasagar, Vivekananda, Bankim Chandra, Gandhi, Rabindranath, Sharat Chandra, Tara Shankar, Vibhuti Bhushan, Jibanananda, Bade Ghulam, Alauddin, Bhishma Dev, Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar, Girish Chandra, Binodini, Shishir Bhaduri, Ahin Chaudhary, Durga Das, and so on. So there are lots of people who are now well known, renowned in the field of Bengali literature, writing, film, politics, and so on and so forth, theatre, and so they're all important, spirituality, religion, they're all important figures, and in some sense their voices are also being represented as ways of actually legitimizing British rule, or for example upholding Hindu culture, right? So Vivekananda, of course, who appears as one of the voices in the play, also upholds the glory of Hindu civilization. And the play also describes the ways in which this state and political and social sponsoring of Hinduism has eclipsed, sidelined, wiped out a lot of local Santali customs and rituals. And a whole way of living has been transformed by colonial modernism and the modern construction of Hinduism. Then over the course of the play, there are also descriptions of various classes of moneylenders who are also, taking advantage, thriving on the money-based economy introduced by the British, right? So the money-based economy introduced by the British merchant rulers is beneficial in producing a whole class of moneylenders from different regions of the country, and they're all bent on fleecing the poor Santals, right? So the Santals call these moneylenders dikus. Okay, and the dikus were joined in their exploitation of the Santals by the landholding class, created to strengthen the foundations of British rule over India. Large quantities of rice, mustard and other oilseeds were sent off to Murshidabad, Calcutta and England. In return, the Santals received a small sum of cash, some salt, tobacco or cloth, the prices of which added up to something far below a reasonable price for their produce. In the rainy season, the moneylenders would lend them some money, rice, maybe a few other commodities thus. So the Santalis are at the mercy of a very powerful nexus or connection between the landholding class and these dikus or these moneylenders, both of whom have been produced by the money-based economy introduced by the British. And the Santals have to, in some sense, work for these, slog away, be exploited, work for these landholders, and they receive a very small portion of the products that they help produce and export to other parts of the country. Then the Santali laborer, hired laborer, is also bears the burden of paying taxes, right? The burden of paying the taxes, of also having to repay loans on high rates of interest, loans that they have taken from these moneylenders, and so they are condemned to a life of poverty and debt, right? They live hereditary lives as bonded laborers, right? So in the rainy season, the moneylenders would lend them some money, rice, maybe a few other commodities, thus remaining masters of the Santals' destinies for the rest of their lives. The rates of interest were exorbitant, going up to 500% at times. So the Santalis are at the mercy of the moneylenders, right, who lend them money, rice, other commodities at very high rates of interest. Then in the process, the Santal would lose the crop in his field, he would lose his plough, his oxen, even himself and his family to pay the interest. Even after he had repaid 10 times the original loan, the burden of the loan remained as heavy as ever in this great festival of plunder. Right? So the Santali has been reduced to a pitiable kind of state of debt, of indebtedness and poverty, which lasts for generations. Now, this notwithstanding the fact the state government later on gave a certain percentage of reservations for tribal and caste communities, the play is also satire on how these reservations are of no use, because these tribal and caste communities do not have access to any sort of institutional power or merit, right? So they are condemned to leading the debt-ridden and impoverished lives that they lead, despite the fact the state has given them or promises them reservations. The play also mentions various products. It almost many of the voices of the characters in the play are like advertisements, advertising new products that are in the market, right? Like Lipton Green Label, Prestige pressure cooker, Indu, another name for film, right? Style proof, scratch proof, time proof, value proof, TVs. These are all voices of consumerism and capitalism, right? And it's in these voices of consumerism and capitalism that certain sections of society, like the Santalis, are completely forgotten, right? They're the ones who probably help produce them. Maybe some of them have tried to move to cities to get jobs, but are still struggling to make ends meet. So we completely forget about the exploitation of these Santali workers who are behind the scenes responsible for producing many of these products. Later on, we have further descriptions of the exploitation of the Santals, the way they were cheated of their property, their vegetables, goats and poultry. They were insulted, they were beaten, they were tortured, the women were raped, nobody was left out. It's also a very kind of satirical description of how Santalis are cheated by the markets that use spurious scales to weigh their produce and give them very low rates for what they sell. So the Santals become these perpetual slaves. There's no relief, there's no freedom, there's no relief from the loans that they have to constantly repay at very high rates of interest. And if the slave refuses to work, he would be terrorized by flogging, starvation, and threat of imprisonment. There was no relief. So it's a whole structure of corruption, of power and corruption, and the Santalis are poor victims at the hands of this structure. It's a structural problem, right? So the British judges and magistrates were bribed by the landholders and moneylenders. Innocent Santals were therefore dealt the severest of sentences, while the oppressors never received even a warning from the court. There's also the play also focuses on the oppressed lives of lower caste Hindus and poor Muslim weavers, right, of certain communities of Bihar and Bengal. Right? So it's not just the Santalis, but it's also the fact that there are other marginalized sections of society like the Dalits and the poor Muslims who are also at the brunt of the revenue taxation system, and they are also leading lives that are spent in trying to repay debts that they of loans that they and the interest in the loans that they owe moneylenders. The question of language also becomes very important here, because there are many Santali words being used here and there to describe the Santali's consciousness, right? And so one of them is hool, the word hool. So one is diku. Diku is the word that Santalis use to refer to these usurious moneylenders. But then there's also the word hool, which means revolt, right? And so the play also describes the spread of the Santali revolt against moneylenders and the larger structure of power. So many of these Santalis, they have a very intimate knowledge of the forest landscape, and they also have their own strategic forms of warfare, and they also have their own small weapons and guns that they use to attack these moneylenders. And so they secretly, ransack these Diku houses. Right? There are these moneylenders who are Bengali, Punjabi, Bhojpuri, Bhatia, and so on. And these Santals go on a raiding spree, trying to raid these Diku houses of their undue wealth and black money. So many of these Santalis who carry out this raid are hung, they're hanged or they are killed, but then not one Santali surrenders to the police. Then again, this is juxtaposed to the voices of certain important luminaries of the early generation of Bengalis who received the benefits of Western colonial education. One, of course, is the very important scholar Raja Ram Mohan Roy, whose voice is also represented in the play. So of course these voices, all these people, these historical characters, are exposed for the hypocrisy, for the fact that they all, in some sense, some way or the other, legitimized British rule. Right? They all felt that British rule was in some sense beneficial to the country. So, for example, Ram Mohan, we hear Ram Mohan justifying the indigo plantations, and completely forgetting that the tyranny and the exploitation and the brutal oppression of the indigo planters on local populations. On the whole, the indigo planters have performed more good to the generality of the natives of this country than any other class of European, whether in or out of the service. Right? So completely oblivious of the fact that the indigo plantations also produced mass famines and starvation and exploitation. If Europeans of character and capital were allowed to settle in the country, it would greatly improve the resources of the country and also the condition of the native inhabitants. So these are probably quotes of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. The peasantry and villagers in the interior are quite ignorant of and indifferent about either the former or the present government, and attribute the protection they may enjoy or oppression they may suffer to the conduct of the public officers immediately presiding over them. But men of aspiring character and members of such ancient families as are very much reduced by the present system consider it derogatory to accept the trifling public situations which natives are allowed to hold under the British government and are decidedly disaffected with it. Many of those, however, who engage prosperously in commerce, and of those who are secured in their peaceful possession of their estates by the permanent settlement, and such as have sufficient intelligences to foresee the probability of future improvement which presents itself under the British rulers, are not only reconciled to it but really view it as a blessing to the country. So Raja Ram Mohan Roy justifies the benefits of British rule of the permanent settlement that produced a new class of landholders, and believes that the peasantry and the villagers are ignorant of the or are indifferent of the welfare measures of the government, the beneficial rule of the British, right? So they know nothing, and we know everything, right? So that's the tone. So he believes that the British government is the only government that can actually bring in, liberties, civil rights. Right? Then there's also Bankim Chatterjee, the important Bengali writer, Bankim Chatterjee, who again, is called the father of nationalism, but actually ends up saying that, for without the support of the English, there is no way to revive the eternal religion. So he says that the only way to revive the eternal religion of Hinduism can only be with the support of the British. We'll set the English to rule over us. They are now traders only, devoted to collecting money. They do not care to take on the burden of administration. As a result of this revolt of the sannyasis, they will be compelled to take on the responsibility of administration. The revolt of the sannyasis occurred only to make the English our rulers. There will be many who grumble, is freedom then equal to foreign rule? Why do the nations of the world then lay down their lives for freedom? To those who say thus, I shall submit that we are not concerned with that issue at all. For we are a nation under foreign rule, and we shall remain under foreign rule for many years more. Hence, those issues do not concern us. So, Bankim Chandra isn't really concerned about freedom from foreign rule. He only feels that the foreign rule can only become an indirect means through which, Hinduism can be made into an eternal religion. Then there are the voices of people like Swami Vivekananda, who says, I do not say that we do not need political or social advancement, but I trust religion comes before everything else. Every improvement in India requires first of all an upheaval in religion. Before flooding India with socialistic or political ideas, first deluge the land with spiritual ideas. So this is part of Vivekananda's speech at the Conference of Religions at Chicago, where he upheld the primary importance of Hinduism, of religion. He says, retain Hinduism in your spiritual faith and religious practice in the very core of your being. Right? So Vivekananda becomes, like Bankim, another force of Hinduism, of a certain construction of Hinduism as an eternal source of enlightenment and freedom. And this is, of course, like Sarkar does in his other plays, there's always an ironic contrast between, let's say, the voices of nationalism, of liberation, of salvation, and a chorus which talks about the reality of the violent exclusions on which the nation is built and becomes. So fear, condemnation, opposition, silence, greed, self-interest, loyalty, slavery, salvation, fear, condemnation, opposition. Right? So So this is the reality, that even as the nation state believes that it can become, it is liberated, it is free, it is, with the help of the British, they will actually produce a democratic country which believes in civil and public and political rights. But still, those rights are not available to everyone that is part of the country. So not everyone actually belongs to the nation state. There are always some violent exclusions on which the nation state is being produced. Many of these voices in the play read like voices, like the voices of newsreaders or articles from newspapers. Right? So many of these characters are actually reading out articles from the newspapers which reflect the victims of the country, victims who have died of floods, who have died of poverty, who have killed themselves because they cannot repay high interest loans. Right, of people who have died of police persecution and violence. Many of them have been shot dead. There are many refugees from Bangladesh who are now, or many Santalis who have been exiled to Dandakaranya. Many refugees who have arrived in Dandakaranya. Many of them have been killed by the police. Right, so many of these articles that are taken from various points in history, both before independence and after independence, describe the plight of people who have been exiled, poor people, tribals, lower caste people, people who have been accused of sedition, of going against the British, who have been exiled to the forests of Dandakaranya. So there are many political prisoners, for example, who are languishing in the Alipur jail, who have not been given any food to eat, who are starving. They have not been given soap to bathe. There's also a spiraling, investment in weapons, international, investment in weapons, and also in the investment in, importing, trading scientists, technologists, skilled workmen and artisans between countries. And of course, the whole global investment in warfare, in military technology, is to actually, produce a new cycle of state-sponsored violence and oppression against the marginalized, or against all those people who are considered to be enemies of the nation state. Then there are further descriptions in the play of the kinds of state-sponsored atrocities that are being committed by the police, along with the help of the zamindars, the landowners, and the moneylenders, of the number of Santalis who have been raped and killed and pillaged. And one of the interesting devices that Sarkar uses in the play is of a dead man. There's a dead man who is walking around on the stage, not on the stage, but he occupies different points of the performance arena, and he becomes an allegory of the marginalized Santalis. He also becomes a symbol of the rebelliousness of the Santalis, of the power of the Santalis to oppose and strike back at the British, at the moneylenders, at the landowners, through their own strategic warfare. Right. So you have a dead man who is robed, who is cloaked, and who silently uses different hand gestures to indicate the shifts in the Santali mood, right? So there are moments where Santali wants to rebel. There are moments where the Santali has been victimized. There are moments where Santali has to attack. So you have, for example, a stage description such as this, where, for example, there is a moment where in the play where one of the British sepoys moves up to an old Santal who's streaming with blood and is surrounded by the bodies of the dead, and he asks the Santal who has been rebelling, who's been revolting against the British, to ask him to drop his weapon. But the old man raises his battle axe and with one stroke beheads the sepoy. So the stage direction is like this, which says the dead man suddenly turns around, and so the dead man is witness to all these different actions that are happening in the play, and the dead man suddenly turns around, forces his way through the crowd. So the crowd scatters, some fall to the ground. The old Santali tune again the rhythm shaky and a bit uncertain, the pace slow. The men on the floor grope for one another, grope for the melody like blind men reaching out. Dead man enters slowly from a different direction. He takes his position in the middle as the group hold hands and move in a circle around him, still in a state of blindness, the bodies moving uncertainly to the pull of the hands. Right, so the dead man is someone who was constantly on stage, as it were, but is also in some sense constantly embodying the rebelliousness of the Santalis, the revolt, the spirit of rebellion within the Santalis. In one of the encounters between the British, who take the help of the zamindars, the moneylenders, and the indigo planters, who provide the British with money, with men and money, they're all conspiring to eradicate Santals and eradicate the villages and kill all of them. So at that moment where there is this action taking place between the Santalis who are secretly hiding and are trying out their strategic warfare tactics by shooting at these policemen, these sepoys, soldiers, the dead man again appears. They jump up with tremendous spurts of energy and freeze into positions at various points in the acting area, armed with bows and arrows and battle axes. Dead man has appeared, his right hand raised. One's eyes are riveted on the hand from a distance. He starts reading. Dead man draws him along through crowds of men. Right? So that dead man performs many functions in the play. So this play, unlike the previous two plays, does not end on a note of hope, but it just restricts itself to descriptions of atrocities which are being committed against tribal and lower caste communities. So there's also, of course, and the play moves from the pre-colonial, from the pre-British, pre-independence times all the way down to the post-colonial period, from the to the 1970s, all through the Naxalite movement, as well as the other atrocities that are committed against Dalits and Santals, in various parts of Bengal and Bihar. And so in some sense the play is also trying to show how the legacies of colonialism have lasted well into the 70s and 80s, and so there seems to be no respite from the kinds of structural forms of discrimination and violence that occur from the pre-independence period. Right? So let us now complete our discussion of Badal Sarkar by looking at the slides. Born 1925, died in 2011. He was born in 1925 in a Christian family in Calcutta, studied in a Bengali medium school and Scottish Church Collegiate School. He read Bengali playwrights in his youth. He also studied to become an engineer. He later got a diploma in town planning in London, where he watched many important European and American plays. His work took him to Nigeria, where he wrote some of his best plays. Known for his play Ebong Indrajit, Sarkar initially wrote comedies and plays that had to do with the alienation of the middle class individual. His earlier plays were staged on the proscenium stage. He later abandoned the proscenium theatre because he felt restricted by the stage, makeup, lighting, backdrop, etc. He formed something called third theatre, which was free of what was necessary for proscenium theatre. It was basically a third form of theatre which was free of the proscenium stage, of the realism of the proscenium stage, as well as folk theatre, what was commonly understood to be folk theatre. And he engaged in free and direct communication with the audience in an intimate setting, and which was also free to watch. Right? So the audience could, if they wish, donate money. So it was called his form of third theatre was free of the conventions of proscenium stage theatre in terms of its artificial lighting, makeup, backdrop, and so on. It was also did not necessarily incorporate or copy or imitate folk theatre, but it was also free in the sense that it engaged in free and direct communication with the audience in a very intimate setting, and it was free to watch, and the audience could, if they wish, donate money. Right? His theatre moved from the proscenium to the Angan Manch or the theatre all round, where the audience sat around the room or courtyard and the actor interacted with the audience, to the Mukta Manch or open area, and to the street. He believed the function of theatre was to bring about social and political transformation. In the play Procession, the play uses the idea of Calcutta as a city of processions to describe the apparent success of many political and religious processions in the city that is supposed to unite people. The play was the first play by Sarkar to be performed in an open area. There are 6 anonymous characters who assume different voices in the play. It describes the suffering and exploitation of the anonymous rural peasantry and farmers. Khoka, the missing boy in the play, becomes an allegory of the deprived and marginalized. The old man is an older version of Khoka who's in search of him. Nothing much has changed over the generations as people are in search of their own sense of self. There are many issues covered in the play, from caste violence, poverty, the nuclear bomb, and starvation. It ends on a new note of hope at the possibility of finally finding a procession that would truly unite people irrespective of their differences. In Bhoma, like Khoka, is an allegory of the nameless, exploited, and suffering rural peasantry. There are 6 anonymous actors who assume different voices. A common refrain is the blood of the peasantry and farmers who have soaked the soil they cultivate with their own blood. There is an ironic contrast between voices that praise the glorious history of the nation and its unity and technological advancements and the plight of the peasantry. The state has money to spend on roads and bridges, trains, but there is no water for cultivation. The farmers caught in a vicious cycle of poverty and debt. Bank loans cannot be had without any assets or securities. Without money, there can be no capital, no diesel pumps to pump water. The play covers the problems of seasonal employment for some farmers who don't have enough water to cultivate in the dry season and work as hired laborers for big farmers. The stark differences between the urban youth who aspire to get admitted to prestigious educational institutions and go abroad at the cost of others' tax money. The lasting casualties of nuclear power and the atom bomb, and the impact radioactivity has on generations of deformed children and on the environment, even if it is being used for peaceful purposes. These are the issues that the play exposes. The ecological and urban human habitat of the Sundarban is threatened by the demands of urban expansionism and cultivation and wildlife, like crocodiles and tigers that have been preying on indigenous communities. So if you remember the last time we discussed the play, we had there was an example of the Sundarbans towards the end of the play, which is threatened by the demands of urban expansionism, by the demands of agriculture and cultivation, and on the other hand, the people who live there are also threatened by the wildlife that's present there. Even the official language of conservation does not ensure the sustainable survival and livelihood of the communities and wildlife. The play ends on a note of hope that there is that if there was an equal access and distribution of resources, there would be greater harmony and not inequality. One has to clear the poisonous trees of individualism and private property and greed in order to achieve greater harmony. In Stale News, the play describes the colonial suppression of the Santali revolt against the colonial state and their victimhood at the hands of police violence. The nationalist Hindu elite, who both legitimized and opposed Hindu rule, were estranged from the tribals and denied them their autonomy. Their intimate relationship with nature was upset by the incursions of colonial modernity. There is also romanticization of Santali society as the first agriculturalist settlers. A repeated phrase in the play is Damin Iko, that part of Bhagalpur in Bihar where the Santalis first settled, where their life of insularity was interrupted by British colonialism. They were exploited by moneylenders that had a powerful connection with the land-holding class. There's a dead man in the play who symbolizes the invisibilized Santali in the face of state and police persecution and zamindari exploitation. There's also the spread of state and socially sponsored Hinduism that threatens to wipe out the local beliefs and customs of the Santalis. The play recounts the stories of Santalis being reduced to slaves and bonded laborers. The ruthless tyranny of the British and the landlords is exposed. The play closes with the Santali revolt, their determination to oppose the forces that reduced them to their plight, to their own strategic warfare. Although they are defeated and killed, they refuse to surrender. With that, we come to the end of our discussion of Badal Sarkar, and we also end this particular course on the introduction to modern Indian drama. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.